Hello everyone, Tyler King here with a new episode of NuReview. Today I'm going to be doing a review of Gary Numan's 2006 album, Jagged. Jagged is the 18th studio album by Gary Numan. I've got it right here. There's a actual vinyl version of it that was released, but it's now impossible to find for an inexpensive price. This is going to be a continuation of the industrial rock sound that he started 12 years previously on 1994 Sacrifice, that was continued in 1997's Exile, and 2000's Pure. Now, this is going to be the longest stretch of time between two Gary Numan albums, which is 6 years between this and Pure. This album is going to be his first collaboration with now longtime producer, co-writer, co-conspirator Ade Fenton. Ade Fenton produces this album. He does also contribute keyboard and programming to this album. Also featured on this album is going to be ex-Nine Inch Nails drummer Jerome Dillon on drums, Richard Beasley on drums. Andy Gray is going to be doing some keyboards and programming on here. Monty is going to be back from 2000's Pure, doing drums, keyboards, and programming. And Martin McCarrick of Susie and the Banshees is actually going to be contributing cello to this album. Live guitarist Steve Harris is playing, well, guitar. Rob Holliday is going to be on here playing guitar and bass. And then Gary himself playing keyboards, guitar, vocals, and co-producing this album with Ade Fenton. So let's start it off. The album opens with Pressure. Pressure opens with this very Middle Eastern feel to it as far as the instrumentation and the vibe of it goes. There are some far-off piano notes being played and dissonant hisses being heard. This goes on for a full minute until Gary comes in and sings, "Here is my small black box, filled with hurt, sent by you." As the verse continues, the drumming underneath becomes a little bit more frantic and hectic until finally when we do reach the chorus, it all just explodes into this kaleidoscopic, very anthemic feeling chorus as Gary sings, "And I don't feel the pressure." The Middle Eastern instrumentation is met with violin also as the song goes on, which gives it more of a live feeling than some of the songs on Pure had. However, as far as opening tracks go, I think that after Dominion Day on Exile and the title track on Pure, I think that Pressure is a good opening track. It's not a great opening track like the previous two have been. Up next we have Fold, which opens with this staticky, hissy barrage and these low synth pads that kind of assault the listener for the better part of a minute. Once the song does start proper, it is a slower, more atmospheric number. There is some crunchy drumming that does help to break free of this foggy gloom that we're listening to. Gary is singing about folding various things like your letter, all reason, compassion, etc. And the chorus, once it comes along, is nice, but it feels a little too samey. It almost feels like I've heard this before from Gary. Up next we have Halo, which opens with a very simple drum beat, which goes on again for the better part of a minute. As an aside, that's something about most of the songs here on Jagged. There are very long intros to these songs before the song itself actually does properly start, Halo being no exception to this rule. Now the song really does get into gear when Gary comes in and asks who hasn't made a big mistake, betrayed a love, or turned to hate, before he immediately answers, "You think it's you." There are these very crunching guitars underneath his vocals, and the song is much more up-tempo and aggressive than the first two songs on the album were. And lyrically, I kind of see Gary asking these questions to God, or a God that doesn't exist, evidenced in the chorus when he asks, "Does God bleed on the world?" The song does have more of a live feel to it also than the previous two songs. I'm especially partial to this very short drum fill that comes in about 3 minutes in, right before the last chorus. I wish it lasted a little bit longer, but this is actually going to be one of my favorite songs on the album. The fourth song is Slave, and Slave opens with this pounding beat that again goes on for quite some time. But then once Gary starts singing, it just drops out, leaving Gary singing the first verse over these very icy synths. The beat does come back for the second verse. This time it's joined by this really pulsing synth that helps to drive the song along. And like the song Fold and Pressure to a lesser extent, once the chorus does come in, we are assaulted by this very bombastic instrumentation. Like I said, with Halo, in that pretty much every song on here has this extended intro, almost every song on here as well has this very anthemic chorus, which kind of deters some of the songs, in my opinion. The chugging guitars during the chorus are nice, as are Gary's various oohs, but there's not really enough in this song that makes it unique. Kind of like I said with Fold, I feel like I've heard this song before. There is this very floor tom heavy beat that comes in about 4 minutes into the song, which does help it out, but I feel like by then it's too little too late. The next song is In a Dark Place, which oddly enough was the only single released from the album. It's a faster paced song than Slave, although here the chorus does come in much more quickly than it did on some of the previous songs. Even though, again, we do get this minute plus long intro that takes us into the song. And I feel that the chorus, I mean, it's still this really big anthemic chorus, but it's a bit more power to it. Gary's singing Sometimes I Call Out For You and Sometimes I'm Afraid. The pre-chorus with the heavy blast of synth that goes on is also a highlight to the song, and the song ends on a very particularly pessimistic note. Gary asking, so I ask God if he can save me. He says it's all too dark. The sixth song on the album is Haunted, and Haunted, like the title track, was played live as far back as 2004. This was a song that was written previously to the album sessions. And we do get an intro here, but it is much shorter. We actually get some chugging guitars over this very hi-hat centered drum beat less than half a minute into the song. When Gary does sing, almost all of the instrumentation cuts out, but it still has this very powerful feeling to it. And the instrumentation comes back once the first couple of lines end, and it feels very like driving and intense, and it all comes to a head with this crash cymbal hit right as the chorus starts. This very intense synth part is played as Gary sings, All I've lived. This very intense synth part is played as Gary sings, All I've lived for takes me away from you. Right after the fourth verse, there's this moment of serenity where kind of everything drops out except for this almost menacing, quieter synth part. We get these very far off dissonant beeping and hisses, and these very treated vocals of Gary. And finally, kind of at the end of it, Gary sings all, and right as he sings it, just all the instrumentation just like comes up right underneath him. And it's such a powerful moment on the song, and it's probably my favorite moment on the entire album. And the next song is Blind, which again does have an extended intro, but once the vocals do come in, we are firmly in ballad territory here. The instrumentation is pretty much all these far-off piano keys and this very simple drum beat. And the song opens with the line, I put my fear back in its box, making this the third song on the album so far where Gary mentions putting something inside of a box. And the song clocks in at a little over 7 minutes, but despite the running time, I don't feel like it's fully developed enough to warrant that length. And of course, here we do get another big anthemic chorus, but it really feels out of place, especially given the more tender nature of this song compared to the other ones that we've heard so far. Um, I would go so far as to say that this is one of the least memorable songs on the album. Up next we have Before You Hate It, and the song almost immediately begins with this very floor tom heavy beat. Gary singing Here It Comes Again, saying his pain, which now has a name, is back. The chorus where Gary sings Do You Think of Me is especially crunchy and dirty sounding. It's much more like raw feeling than any of the choruses that we've heard so far on the album, and it really helps it to stick out. But despite that, it still falls into that same trap that Fold or Blind do, in that it's not quite fully developed. It kind of just meanders for a while and doesn't really go anywhere, and I just wish that it didn't sound as samey as some of the songs that came before it. The next song we have is Melt, which again, you get this very extended chorus before we get this crunching guitar over this pounding drum beat about a minute in. And the song itself, once it does start up, is a bit more faster paced than the last couple of songs, which is a nice change. Gary, again, is using the lyrical theme of sleep like he has in songs like Deadliner from the Sacrifice album. Here he's wondering if God laughs at him in his sleep or if the Holy Ghost haunts his dreams. Instrumentally, there's a lot more going on here as well. And the chorus where Gary sings "Save me" in this like really high-pitched voice, it's interesting to hear his voice go that high. And the song does have some really nice lines in it. Gary sings "I know confession is an empty lie" towards the end of the song, and it feels like almost kind of like a continuation of something that could have been started on the Sacrifice album from '94. The next song is Scanner, which opens with this really high-pitched beeping and this really like throbbing bass over this like frantic beeping sound effect, which works really well to draw you into the song. The beeping continues on into the verses before we get this very pretty piano part, before we get, again, another big, swelling, anthemic chorus. The lyrics read kind of like a ghost keeping someone safe, almost like a guardian angel. But again, like the fate of about half of these songs on this album, there's just not enough about it that's unique enough to make it stick out. And then the final song on the album is the title track, Jagged. And again, here we get this very long, extended intro. I think the one on here is longer than any of the other intros on the album, before the sweeping synths and drum beat comes in finally. The song is enhanced by Gary's vocal delivery, most of which is given in this very harsh whisper. He says lines like, "They say I turn innocence to panic," and he asks, "Do you want it, my desire," in the pre-chorus. And finally, about 3 minutes into the song, we do get the large, swelling, anthemic chorus, but here it feels much more rewarding than anything that we've heard so far on the album as far as choruses go. Like, here it's this big payoff that we finally get after this really creepy, sinister part of the song, whereas in most of the other ones it was just kind of like, okay, cool, I've done this, this verse bit, now I might as well just do a big old chorus. Just hearing Gary singing, I feel it fall down as this like everything just kind of swells up underneath his vocals. It's such a great, powerful moment on the album. And the outro, which has this very icy synth lead and again very crunching guitars that sees the song out, does act as this nice end to the album. And that's Jagged, both the song and the album. So, personal thoughts on Jagged. I don't know how well you can see it there with the glare. Jagged, as far as Gary's comeback period goes, I would say from 1994 to current, Jagged is probably the album that I go back to the least amount of times. It does have a few very great songs on it that I enjoy a lot, but about 50 to 70% of it is material that I would just rather hear being done better on a different album. Songs like Blind and Fold and Before You Hate It and Scanner, um, I don't feel like they're necessary songs. I feel like if Gary had just cut the fat and made this into a very nice, succinct, just like powerful 4 or 5 song EP, this would be a much more rewarding and memorable listen than it is. And the reason why I use the word memorable is because about half of the songs on this album sound exactly the same. Fold and Before You Hate It are practically interchangeable, I think. Um, I mean, even songs like In a Dark Place, which I would say falls into the better half of the songs on the album, there's still enough on it to make me not really remember it after it's ended. Um, Production-wise, it's very samey. I think that the production on Pure, and then of course to a better extent, Dead Sun Rising and Splinter is a lot better than Jagged. I feel like Jagged kind of shows the age that it was made in, which is the mid 2000s. Um, uh, Even though that was only 10 years ago, it still sounds incredibly dated. Um, Also, what doesn't help is the extended intros on every fucking song. I feel like if the intros had just been like cut short, it would have made for a much better listen. Now, at the same time, I do admire the atmosphere on it that Gary was going towards. I would say that as far as atmospheric and ambiance goes, this is probably going to be his most atmospheric album, second only to Dance. There's a lot of very dark tones on this album, and it's not going to be as crushing as certain parts of Pure or Splinter are going to be. Um, and there are some moments of pure beauty on this album as well. However, most of it is lost in the what's what I'm looking for. It's kind of overproduced. Um, a lot of it does sound very synthetic, partially even the drumming, which is a shame because you have two great drummers behind the kit. You have Steve Harris and Jerome Dillon. But unfortunately, it's just kind of a shame that they're practically wasted on this album. Um, if I had to choose favorites on this album, of course it would not even probably it would be Halo, Haunted, and Jagged. As far as least favorites go, it's probably going to be the ones I already mentioned: Fold, Scanner, um, Before You Hate It, and Blind. Um, as far as a rating goes for the album, it's, again, I would say it's probably his weakest effort since the mid 90s. I would probably give it a 7 out of 10. Um, I was very close to giving it a 6, but the 3 songs that I did mention that I enjoyed very much do make it a little bit better than a 6 in my opinion. So that's my review of Jagged. Um, I'm getting Dead Sun Rising and Splinter done as soon as I can. Please leave any questions, comments, remarks, criticisms in the comment box below. I'm going to be getting the review of Dead Sun Rising and Splinter up as soon as I can. Again, I do apologize for these delays. Just life has happened. So again, this is Tyler King with NuReview, Gary Numan's Jagged, 7 out of 10.